At exactly 3:17 in the morning, Eric Nolan sat alone in the dark kitchen of a house that no longer felt familiar to him. The silence around him should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were watching him while he tried desperately to understand whether he was losing his mind. Printed screenshots covered nearly the entire kitchen table. Text messages, bank transfers, security camera logs, emails he swore existed only days earlier. Eric had spent the last 4 hours organizing evidence because somewhere deep inside himself he still believed there had to be a rational explanation connecting everything happening around him. But then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten instantly. Entire conversations on his phone had disappeared. Not one or two messages. Entire threads. Weeks of communication erased completely without explanation. Eric froze staring at the screen because he knew with absolute certainty he never deleted them. He checked backups, cloud storage, archived folders. Nothing. It was as if parts of his own life were quietly being removed while he slept. At first, Eric convinced himself stress explained everything. 54 years old. Long work hours. Financial clients demanding constant attention. Sleepless nights caused by anxiety he never admitted publicly. That explanation would have comforted him because stress feels manageable compared to the alternative slowly forming inside his mind. But the missing messages were only the latest in a growing pattern of things he could no longer explain logically. Passwords changing overnight. Calendar appointments disappearing. Friends insisting conversations happened that Eric could not remember at all. Sometimes he walked into rooms convinced he had forgotten something important only to realize later objects themselves had moved. His laptop settings reset randomly. Prescription pills appeared in different cabinets than where he left them. Security cameras inside the house blinked online during hours nobody should have accessed them. Every explanation Vanessa gave sounded calm and reasonable enough to make Eric question himself immediately afterward. You've been under pressure lately. You probably forgot. You always do this when you're stressed. The frightening part was not that Vanessa sounded manipulative. It was that she sounded convincing. Eric Nolan spent most of his life being known as the rational person in every room. Friends trusted him with financial advice because he rarely acted emotionally. Clients respected him because he paid attention to details others missed. For 22 years, people described Eric and Vanessa Nolan as the perfect suburban couple. Stable marriage, beautiful home, intelligent daughter. Dinner parties where Vanessa charmed entire rooms effortlessly, while Eric quietly handled conversations with thoughtful humor and patience. Nothing about their life suggested instability from the outside. That is what made the collapse so terrifying later. Because when emotionally grounded people start questioning their own reality, everyone around them assumes stress before danger, including Eric himself. Even after the missing conversations disappeared from his phone, part of him still searched for innocent explanations instead of confronting the possibility that someone might be manipulating his entire life deliberately. Human beings resist believing they are being controlled because accepting it feels too humiliating, too frightening, especially when the person closest to you becomes the source of confusion itself. Over the following weeks, the situation only became harder to ignore. Eric started printing screenshots obsessively because digital evidence no longer felt reliable enough to trust. He documented timestamps, recorded account changes, photographed objects before leaving rooms. The kitchen slowly transformed into a private investigation nobody else knew existed. Yet every attempt to protect himself somehow made him appear more unstable publicly. Friends stopped returning calls after Vanessa quietly told them Eric struggled with anxiety and memory issues recently. Clients canceled meetings claiming Eric sounded distracted during conversations. Even their daughter Lauren became emotionally distant whenever Eric tried discussing concerns about the house or missing files. It felt like reality itself shifted slightly every day while everyone else adapted normally around him. The isolation became unbearable because psychological manipulation works most effectively when victims begin doubting their own instincts before doubting the person controlling them. And by the time Eric finally realized something genuinely dangerous might be happening, years of trust had already been weaponized against him slowly enough that he no longer knew which memories still belonged to him completely. One night, Eric woke suddenly around 2 in the morning after hearing movement downstairs near his office. At first, he assumed Vanessa simply could not sleep again. But when he walked quietly toward the hallway, he noticed something strange immediately. The small red security light above his office camera blinked repeatedly, as though someone had disabled the recording system temporarily. Eric stopped moving. He listened carefully, drawers opening softly downstairs. Then silence. By the time he entered the office moments later, nobody stood inside. Yet his laptop remained open, displaying folders he never remembered accessing earlier that day. Several financial documents appeared deleted entirely. Eric felt panic rising fast enough he could barely breathe, because this time he knew with absolute certainty something happened. Before he could process the moment fully, Vanessa appeared calmly in the doorway behind him, still wearing her silk robe and half-asleep expression. "Eric," she whispered gently, "what are you doing?" He turned toward her, holding the laptop with trembling hands while trying desperately to explain the missing files. Vanessa listened quietly for nearly a minute before answering in the softest voice imaginable. "You're confused again." That sentence destroyed something inside him because it carried no anger, no panic, no defensiveness, just calm certainty powerful enough to make Eric immediately question his own perception again, despite the fear racing through his chest. Later that same week, he found a prescription pill bottle rolling beneath the bathroom sink that he did not recognize at all. Anti-anxiety medication prescribed under his name 6 months earlier. Eric stared at the label for nearly 10 minutes because he never remembered seeing that prescription before. Vanessa insisted doctors prescribed it after one of his episodes months earlier when stress became overwhelming. Eric had no memory of any episode. No memory of agreeing to medication. No memory of seeing the doctor whose name appeared on the bottle. Every discovery seemed designed not to prove manipulation clearly, but to slowly destabilize his confidence in his own thoughts. That was the truly terrifying part. Nothing happening around Eric Nolan looked dramatic enough individually to convince outsiders he needed help. Yet piece by piece, his reality was becoming impossible to trust completely. Then came the moment that finally shattered any remaining sense of control. After another argument where Eric accused Vanessa of moving files and deleting messages from his devices, he locked himself inside the office, determined to prove something tangible was happening. Hours later, exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed, Eric discovered an old backup phone buried inside a storage drawer beneath financial records. The device barely powered on, but one audio file remained saved automatically from nearly 8 months earlier. Eric pressed play, expecting nothing important. At first, there was only static and muffled background noise. Then Vanessa's voice became clear enough to understand completely. Calm, measured, almost emotionless. Soon nobody will trust him. The recording ended abruptly seconds later before revealing who she spoke to or why. Eric sat frozen in the dark office, staring at the phone, while every memory from the past several years suddenly rearranged itself into something horrifying. Because by then one question had become impossible to ignore. How do you know you're losing control if someone else controls your reality? For most of his adult life, Eric Nolan represented the kind of man people instinctively trusted without hesitation. At 54 years old, he built a successful career as a respected financial consultant advising wealthy clients across Colorado for more than 2 decades. He was careful with details, emotionally reserved, methodical in conversation, and known for solving complicated problems calmly while everyone else panicked. Neighbors described him as dependable. Clients described him as disciplined. Friends described him as rational almost to a fault. Eric Nolan was not the type of person anyone expected to unravel psychologically. That detail mattered later because when emotionally stable people suddenly begin questioning reality itself, society almost always searches for explanations inside the individual before considering manipulation from outside forces. Eric understood that better than anyone, which is why he spent months convincing himself stress explained the increasingly disturbing events happening around him before finally allowing himself to consider something much darker. Because accepting the alternative meant accepting that someone close to him might be rewriting his reality slowly enough he never noticed it happening. From the outside, Eric and Vanessa Nolan appeared to live the kind of quiet suburban American life most people spend years trying to build. Their home sat inside a wealthy neighborhood where every driveway held luxury vehicles and every family seemed polished enough for holiday advertisements. Vanessa hosted charity events regularly and carried herself with elegant confidence that made people naturally gravitate toward her socially. Together, they attended business dinners, family gatherings, and neighborhood functions where nobody ever suspected anything beneath the surface was broken. That image of stability became one of the most important weapons in the story later, because public perception often determines who people believe during private emotional collapse. Eric slowly realized this in horrifying stages as more strange incidents accumulated around him. Missing emails, calendar entries disappearing, financial records altered slightly overnight, friends insisting Eric forgot conversations they clearly remembered happening. At first, even the audience watching his story would likely assume stress or exhaustion explained the confusion. That was exactly what made the situation so disturbing. The manipulation worked precisely because every individual incident seemed small enough to rationalize separately. Then the questions started multiplying faster than Eric could answer them. Was Eric Nolan actually losing his mind? Were years of pressure finally causing psychological deterioration he simply could not recognize himself? If not, then who exactly kept deleting evidence from his devices and altering pieces of his life without explanation? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why did Vanessa remain so calm during every crisis, no matter how emotionally distressed Eric became? That emotional imbalance slowly transformed ordinary moments inside the house into something deeply uncomfortable. Whenever Eric panicked about missing files or forgotten conversations, Vanessa responded with the same gentle patience people use around frightened children. Never angry, never defensive, just softly reassuring him he was confused again. Over time, that phrase started following Eric everywhere. During dinners, during arguments, even during therapy appointments, Vanessa encouraged him to attend after his behavior became increasingly erratic publicly. You've been under pressure. You're forgetting things lately. Maybe you should rest. Each sentence sounded caring enough individually that Eric often questioned himself immediately afterward. But somewhere deep inside, another instinct kept whispering that something was terribly wrong. The unease surrounding Eric's life grew gradually enough that even he struggled identifying when ordinary stress transformed into genuine fear. Some mornings, he woke convinced entire conversations from the previous day never happened at all until Vanessa described them in vivid detail. Friends slowly became distant after Eric started accusing people of discussing private information he never remembered sharing. Smart home devices activated randomly during late hours of the night while nobody touched them. Security cameras blinked offline unexpectedly before reconnecting minutes later. Once Eric returned home from work to discover his office completely reorganized, while Vanessa calmly insisted he rearranged everything himself during the weekend. Another time, his longtime business partner called privately asking whether Eric was drinking heavily because Vanessa expressed concern about memory problems worsening lately. Eric laughed the accusation away publicly, but afterward he sat alone in his car, unable to stop shaking, because he realized people around him no longer trusted his version of events automatically. And perhaps the most terrifying part of psychological manipulation is that victims often begin helping destroy their own credibility without realizing it. The more desperate Eric sounded trying to explain what was happening, the more unstable he appeared to everyone listening. Vanessa Nolan understood exactly how to maintain that balance perfectly. She never openly attacked Eric in front of others, never screamed, never threatened him publicly. Instead, she corrected him subtly in conversations whenever he misremembered details. If Eric claimed someone moved files inside his office, Vanessa gently reminded him he reorganized everything himself last weekend. If Eric insisted emails disappeared from his accounts, Vanessa suggested he probably deleted them accidentally during one of his late-night work sessions. Watching them together publicly created an unsettling emotional contrast. Eric looked increasingly anxious and obsessive while Vanessa appeared patient, composed, and concerned for her husband's well-being. Even Lauren, their daughter, started treating Eric more carefully over time as though afraid. Emotional stress might trigger another outburst. Eric noticed it immediately in small, heartbreaking ways. The cautious tone in her voice, the way she exchanged silent glances with Vanessa after he questioned something strange around the house. It felt like his entire life was shifting slowly beneath his feet while everyone else adapted normally around him. Then came the discovery that changed everything. After weeks of secretly documenting missing files and altered records, Eric found an old backup phone buried inside storage boxes beneath financial paperwork in his office closet. The device barely functioned anymore, but one audio file remained automatically saved under an unlabeled folder dated 8 months earlier. Eric almost ignored it completely until he recognized Vanessa's voice through the static. Calm, controlled, speaking quietly to someone whose voice never became clear enough to identify. Soon nobody will trust him. Eric froze instantly because the sentence carried terrifying certainty behind it. Not frustration, not emotional anger. Intention. Then the recording cut off abruptly before revealing anything further. Eric replayed the clip nearly 20 times alone in the dark office afterward, because for the first time, he finally possessed evidence proving his fear might not be paranoia after all. Someone was manipulating his reality deliberately, and the person closest to him seemed to know exactly what was happening long before he did. Long before Eric Nolan began questioning his own reality, he was the kind of man people rarely worried about emotionally. Reliable men often become invisible in a certain way because society tends to notice chaos far more than consistency. Eric built his entire identity around being dependable. He woke at the same time every morning, ironed his own shirts even after 22 years of marriage, balanced household budgets down to exact numbers, and still carried handwritten appointment books despite everyone around him relying completely on digital calendars. Friends joked that Eric belonged to another generation because he preferred face-to-face conversations over texting and still believed promises should mean something permanently once spoken aloud. He was intelligent without being arrogant, financially successful without showing off, and emotionally reserved in ways many people associated with stability rather than suppression. That detail mattered deeply later because Eric Nolan did not fit the image most people imagine when hearing stories about manipulation or psychological abuse. He was not reckless, unstable, or obviously vulnerable. He looked like someone firmly in control of his life, which is exactly why he failed to recognize control slowly disappearing from him for years. People who knew Eric professionally trusted him almost instinctively because of how carefully he approached every decision. He listened more than he spoke during meetings, rarely raised his voice, never reacted impulsively, Younger coworkers often described him as old-fashioned but comforting because he still believed integrity mattered more than image. Even during stressful situations, Eric remained calm enough to steady everyone else around him. That emotional steadiness became one of the reasons his eventual unraveling shocked people so deeply later. Clients who spent years relying on Eric for financial guidance struggled, believing someone so rational could suddenly become paranoid or emotionally unstable. And perhaps most heartbreaking of all, Eric himself spent far too long trusting his own emotional discipline to protect him from manipulation. He genuinely believed intelligent people recognized when something dangerous was happening around them. What he did not understand, yet, was that psychological control rarely arrives dramatically. It enters quietly through trust, routine, affection, and gradual dependence until victims no longer recognize where their own instincts end and someone else's influence begins. Vanessa Nolan understood human perception better than almost anyone around her. Elegant, socially magnetic, and emotionally composed in every situation, Vanessa carried herself with the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. At charity events, people naturally gathered around her while she remembered names, birthdays, and personal details with impressive precision. Friends described her as warm. Neighbors described her as supportive. Even Eric's co-workers privately admitted Vanessa seemed like the perfect partner for someone as emotionally reserved as Eric. She balanced him socially, smoothed awkward conversations, handled situations requiring charm and emotional intelligence far better than Eric ever could comfortably. Publicly, their marriage looked ideal because Vanessa understood exactly how to create that image carefully over time. Family vacations appeared flawless online. Dinner parties felt polished and intimate. Even arguments between them rarely became visible because Vanessa almost never lost emotional control publicly. Looking back later, many people admitted they envied the Nolans' relationship. That made the truth far more disturbing because manipulation becomes especially difficult to identify when the controlling person appears compassionate, intelligent, and socially admired by everyone around them. The warning signs existed much earlier than Eric realized, but they arrived so gradually he interpreted them as care rather than control. Vanessa often answered questions directed toward Eric during social gatherings before he could respond himself. At first it seemed harmless. She remembered schedules better, helped him navigate conversations, finished stories when he forgot details. Over time, though, the pattern became impossible to ignore once Eric finally looked backward carefully. Vanessa corrected his memory casually in front of people whenever he misremembered dates, conversations, or small details. "No, Eric, that happened last Thursday. You already told him that story. You forgot because you were stressed." Individually, those moments felt insignificant. Together, they slowly reshaped how others perceived Eric's reliability. Even more unsettling was Vanessa's increasing involvement in every aspect of their household finances despite Eric spending decades professionally managing complex financial portfolios himself. She insisted handling passwords, organizing accounts, and monitoring expenses would reduce his stress levels. Eric accepted the help gratefully because by then he trusted Vanessa completely. Why wouldn't he? Marriage teaches people to lower emotional defenses around the person closest to them. Unfortunately, that same trust also creates perfect conditions for manipulation when intentions become harmful. The isolation happened quietly enough Eric barely noticed it at first. Vanessa never demanded he stop seeing friends directly. Instead, she reframed relationships slowly until distance happened naturally. She reminded Eric certain friends only contacted him when needing financial advice. Suggested coworkers secretly mocked his old-fashioned habits behind his back. Encouraged more evenings at home because people become exhausting eventually. Sometimes she scheduled social events on nights Eric planned seeing longtime friends, then acted disappointed if he still chose to leave. Other times, she subtly implied people worried about his stress levels lately after conversations he never remembered happening. Eric increasingly relied on Vanessa as the primary interpreter of social situations because she always sounded emotionally reasonable while explaining why others behaved differently around him. That is one of the most devastating realities surrounding psychological control. Victims rarely recognize isolation while it's happening because the controlling person frames dependence as emotional closeness instead of restriction. Eric genuinely believed Vanessa protected him from unnecessary stress and disappointing relationships. By the time he started noticing how alone he felt socially, years of gradual separation had already occurred. Nolan noticed tensions inside the family long before either parent acknowledged them openly. Their daughter inherited Eric's quiet observational nature, which meant she often recognized emotional shifts other people ignored completely. One evening during dinner when Lauren was home from college, Eric made an offhand comment about feeling unusually exhausted lately despite working less than previous years. Vanessa immediately interrupted with a laugh, reminding him he forgot an important meeting earlier that week because stress affected his memory again. The conversation moved on quickly, but Lauren kept watching her father carefully afterward. Later that night, while helping Eric clean dishes in the kitchen, she asked a question so quietly he almost missed it entirely. "Dad, are you actually happy?" Eric laughed automatically because the question felt absurd at first. Of course he was happy. Successful career, beautiful home, stable marriage, healthy family. Everything people spend entire lives chasing. Yet even while answering, something inside him hesitated briefly in a way he did not fully understand at the time. Lauren noticed it immediately. That moment would haunt Eric years later because it became one of the first times someone close to him recognized emotional discomfort. He still lacked language to explain himself. At the time, Eric dismissed the question completely. He hugged Lauren, joked about her spending too much time studying psychology at school, and returned to normal life without thinking much more about it afterward. But deep down, tiny cracks had already started forming beneath the surface of his carefully controlled world. He simply had not realized yet that someone else was slowly widening them every single day. The shift from quiet discomfort to genuine fear happened slowly enough that Eric Nolan could not identify the exact moment his life stopped feeling normal. At first, the strange incidents remained small and easy to dismiss individually. A password failed unexpectedly during a client presentation, even though Eric used the same login for years. Important emails vanished from folders he distinctly remembered organizing the night before. Meetings with long-term clients appeared mysteriously canceled despite Eric never touching his calendar. Vanessa always responded with calm explanations before panic fully reached him. "You probably forgot updating the password. Maybe the emails were archived accidentally. You've been distracted lately, Eric." And because none of the incidents looked dramatic alone, Eric kept convincing himself stress explained the confusion better than anything else. But eventually the pattern became impossible to ignore because every problem somehow damaged his credibility specifically. Clients began asking whether Eric was feeling all right emotionally during meetings. Coworkers repeated conversations he could not remember having. One longtime investor quietly recommended Eric consider taking time off after hearing concerns from Vanessa about memory lapses worsening recently. The terrifying part was not that people doubted him. It was how reasonable their doubts sounded. Soon even Eric's own body stopped feeling trustworthy. Prescription medication moved between cabinets overnight. Alarms he never set started appearing on his phone. Once he discovered his office door standing open at 3 in the morning despite locking it personally hours earlier before bed. Another night, the house security system activated randomly, while Vanessa calmly insisted Eric accidentally triggered it himself. Eric began documenting everything obsessively because memory no longer felt reliable enough to trust. He photographed object placements before leaving rooms, printed important emails immediately after receiving them, wrote detailed notes about conversations in hidden notebooks Vanessa could not access. But somehow the more carefully he tried protecting himself, the more unstable he appeared publicly. Friends stopped calling as often. Business associates exchanged uncomfortable glances whenever Eric questioned missing information. Even Lauren started sounding cautious during phone conversations, as though worried saying the wrong thing might upset him emotionally. Vanessa remained perfectly composed through all of it. That emotional contrast slowly destroyed Eric's confidence, because no matter how frightened or frustrated he became, Vanessa always looked patient and concerned rather than defensive. She spoke about his stress the way loving spouses discuss illness, quietly affecting someone they care about deeply. Then came the business dinner that changed everything permanently. The event itself seemed ordinary at first. Eric met several longtime clients at an upscale downtown restaurant discussing potential investments, while Vanessa attended a charity fundraiser across the city. Witnesses later described Eric as tired but functional during the first half of the evening. He drank only 2 glasses of wine across nearly 3 hours, something completely normal for him socially. Yet midway through dinner, Eric suddenly started feeling disoriented in ways he struggled explaining afterward. The restaurant lights became strangely overwhelming. Conversations around him sounded delayed and distorted. One client later told investigators Eric repeated the same question twice within minutes before forgetting entire portions of earlier discussions completely. Embarrassed and increasingly confused, Eric excused himself early, claiming exhaustion from work stress. By the time he reached the parking garage, even walking felt difficult. His thoughts moved sluggishly while panic slowly built beneath the confusion, because deep down Eric knew something was wrong beyond ordinary anxiety. He called Vanessa during the drive home, but afterward he could barely remember the conversation itself clearly. Fragments from the rest of that night survived inside Eric's memory, like broken pieces of a dream rather than complete events. Vanessa standing inside the office illuminated by laptop light while deleting files rapidly from his computer. Eric collapsing halfway up the staircase after struggling to stay conscious. A red security camera light blinking off above the hallway moments before everything went dark. Vanessa speaking calmly on the phone in another room, while Eric drifted in and out of awareness, unable to understand what she was saying. Then nothing. Complete blankness until morning. Eric woke inside a hospital bed staring at fluorescent lights while monitors beeped steadily beside him. His head felt heavy and disconnected from his body. Vanessa sat nearby looking exhausted but composed in exactly the way worried spouses appear after traumatic nights. Doctors explained Eric suffered what they described as a severe anxiety episode potentially connected to exhaustion, stress, and emotional instability building for months. One physician even mentioned possible nervous breakdown symptoms requiring psychiatric evaluation if episodes continued. Eric listened silently because arguing felt impossible, while confusion still clouded his thoughts. But somewhere beneath the disorientation, another emotion kept growing stronger: fear. Over the following days, Vanessa carefully controlled the narrative surrounding Eric's hospitalization before he fully understood how much damage already spread socially. Friends received concerned phone calls explaining Eric struggled mentally lately, but resisted getting help. Clients were informed he needed temporary leave due to stress-related exhaustion. Even Lauren drove home immediately after Vanessa tearfully explained her father experienced another confusing episode, frightening enough to require emergency care. Eric watched his own life slowly being reframed around instability while still trying desperately to organize fragmented memories from the business dinner. Whenever he questioned details, Vanessa answered softly and consistently. "You scared everyone, Eric. You don't remember how upset you were. People are worried about you." The most devastating part was that pieces of her version actually aligned with his confusion enough to make self-doubt unavoidable. Maybe he really had forgotten conversations. Maybe anxiety truly was affecting his memory. Maybe exhaustion finally broke something psychologically after years of stress. That uncertainty trapped Eric emotionally, because manipulation becomes most effective when victims cannot completely trust either themselves or the person controlling them. Several weeks later, while searching old storage drives hidden inside his office closet, Eric accidentally discovered something that shattered every remaining attempt to rationalize the situation innocently. Buried among archived financial backups sat a hidden folder containing dozens of short video files dated across nearly 8 months. Eric opened one expecting security footage or accidental recordings. Instead, he found himself staring at clips documenting private emotional moments he never knew anyone recorded. Arguments inside the kitchen. Eric pacing anxiously during sleepless nights. Conversations where he sounded confused, exhausted, emotionally unstable. Some recordings captured him after drinking heavily alone while trying to organize missing paperwork scattered across the office. Others showed panic attacks Eric barely remembered having at all. Every clip framed him exactly the same way. Disoriented, irrational, unstable. Eric sat frozen, watching file after file, realizing someone spent months secretly documenting his emotional deterioration carefully enough to build a narrative around it. Then he noticed something even worse. In several reflections visible through mirrors and dark windows, Vanessa appeared calmly holding the camera. After discovering the hidden recordings, Eric Nolan stopped viewing the strange events in his life as isolated accidents. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider something he had resisted emotionally for months. Someone might be manipulating him deliberately. The possibility terrified him because accepting it meant questioning the foundation of his entire marriage, his memories, and even his understanding of himself. Eric began secretly documenting everything with obsessive precision. He purchased small notebooks Vanessa would never notice missing and hid them inside air vents, storage boxes, and locked drawers at the office. Every strange event received timestamps, screenshots, and written descriptions. Password changes, missing files, financial transfers he never remembered approving, smart home devices activating at impossible hours. Even conversations with Vanessa became part of the investigation because Eric increasingly suspected their entire life was being monitored somehow. He started checking smoke detectors for hidden microphones, covered laptop cameras with tape, removed batteries from old phones before sleeping. Rationally, Eric understood how paranoid those behaviors sounded. But once someone begins doubting reality itself, ordinary caution slowly transforms into survival instinct. And unfortunately for Eric, the more desperate he became trying to prove manipulation, the more unstable he appeared to everyone around him. The public collapse of Eric Nolan's reputation happened gradually enough that many people barely noticed it occurring until the damage was already permanent. Clients who once trusted him completely started requesting meetings with younger consultants instead. Some quietly transferred accounts elsewhere after Vanessa expressed concern about Eric's emotional health privately during social gatherings. Friends stopped inviting him to dinners because conversations with Eric increasingly revolved around missing evidence, altered files, and suspicions nobody else could verify. One longtime golfing partner eventually admitted he felt uncomfortable around Eric lately because every interaction seemed emotionally tense and exhausting. Vanessa, meanwhile, became the sympathetic figure holding everything together publicly. She attended events alone while gently explaining Eric struggled with anxiety and memory issues recently. People admired her patience. They praised her loyalty. Watching Vanessa care for a husband apparently unraveling emotionally only strengthened her credibility socially while destroying Eric's at the same time. That imbalance became psychologically devastating because Eric realized something horrifying. Public perception had already shifted so completely that even truthful accusations coming from him now sounded irrational automatically. Lauren Nolan's growing distance hurt Eric more deeply than the professional damage ever could. Their daughter stopped calling regularly after Vanessa confided concerns about Eric's episodes, becoming emotionally unpredictable. During visits home, Lauren watched her father carefully, the same way people monitor someone recovering from mental illness. Conversations became cautious, controlled. Once when Eric tried explaining that files disappeared from his office again overnight, Lauren interrupted gently and suggested maybe stress was making him hyper-focus on harmless mistakes. Eric immediately stopped talking because hearing those words from his own daughter felt unbearable. He understood she was trying to help, but the emotional isolation became overwhelming once even Lauren questioned his reality. Some nights, Eric sat alone replaying old family videos, searching desperately for evidence that he had once been normal before everything started unraveling. Yet, even those memories became difficult to trust completely because Vanessa appeared calm, loving, and emotionally supportive in every recording. There were no obvious signs of cruelty, no dramatic abuse, just subtle moments that felt different now when viewed through suspicion. A correction here, a dismissive glance there. Vanessa answering questions for Eric before he spoke himself. Tiny details impossible to prove harmful individually, yet deeply unsettling together. As Eric's behavior grew increasingly erratic, multiple explanations emerged from people trying to understand what was happening to him. Some doctors quietly suspected early dementia after Eric struggled recalling conversations consistently during evaluations. Others believed substance abuse explained the paranoia because Eric's drinking worsened dramatically after the hospital incident. A former coworker privately suggested corporate sabotage might be involved because Eric handled sensitive financial accounts connected to wealthy clients and major investments. Online forums discussing the case later became obsessed with theories about midlife psychosis triggered by stress, repressed trauma, or undiagnosed mental illness. Even audiences hearing Eric's story would likely question reality alongside him because nothing surrounding the situation felt entirely clear. That uncertainty became one of the most psychologically disturbing parts of the entire case. Eric genuinely seemed unstable sometimes. He forgot details, contradicted himself, became obsessive, snapped emotionally during conversations. Yet beneath the confusion, small pieces of evidence kept surfacing that suggested manipulation might still be real. The audience itself becomes trapped inside the same emotional uncertainty Eric experiences. Is he uncovering abuse? Or constructing paranoia around ordinary mistakes caused by mental deterioration? Sleep disappeared from Eric's life almost completely during this period. Some nights he stayed awake until sunrise reviewing screenshots and recordings, repeatedly searching for patterns everyone else ignored. Other nights he wandered silently through the house checking locks, cameras, and electronic devices while Vanessa slept peacefully upstairs. He became terrified of forgetting important details, so he started secretly recording conversations using old phones hidden inside jacket pockets. At first, Eric felt ashamed doing it because the behavior resembled exactly the kind of paranoia Vanessa warned people about publicly. But then strange inconsistencies inside conversations started emerging once he replayed recordings later. Vanessa frequently denied saying things Eric distinctly remembered hearing only hours earlier. Sometimes audio files themselves disappeared before he could review them fully. Other times timestamps appeared altered completely. Eric stopped trusting digital information entirely. He printed everything physically because paper at least could not change itself overnight. Yet even with evidence surrounding him constantly, Eric still questioned his own sanity privately. That is what prolonged psychological manipulation does eventually. Victims begin arguing against their own instincts because uncertainty becomes emotionally safer than confronting betrayal from someone they love completely. Then came the discovery that changed the entire direction of Eric Nolan's investigation. Desperate for answers no therapist or doctor could provide, Eric secretly hired a digital forensic expert named Caleb Mercer after finding his information through encrypted online forums discussing surveillance abuse cases. Caleb initially assumed Eric suffered ordinary paranoia connected to stress or marital breakdown. But after examining several of Eric's devices privately, his attitude changed completely. Within days, Caleb uncovered evidence that someone remotely accessed Eric's phones, laptops, email accounts, and cloud storage repeatedly over multiple years. Not random hacking attempts. Consistent administrative access sophisticated enough to alter files, monitor communications, and remove digital records selectively without triggering obvious alerts. Eric sat frozen while Caleb explained the implications carefully because suddenly every missing email, altered calendar, and disappearing conversation stopped looking imaginary. Someone truly had been inside his devices controlling information around him for years. Then Caleb revealed one final detail that made Eric physically sick. The access permissions traced repeatedly back toward devices registered under Vanessa and Nolan's name. Caleb Mercer spent nearly 6 hours walking Eric Nolan through the digital evidence because the truth was so disturbing it sounded impossible at first. Remote access logs connected to Eric's devices stretched back almost 7 years. Not random intrusions. Consistent surveillance. Someone monitored emails, copied messages, altered cloud backups, and manipulated security settings with administrative precision over long periods of time. Caleb explained that whoever controlled the system understood Eric's habits intimately because the changes were always subtle enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Files disappeared gradually. Calendar entries shifted slightly. Password resets happened during stressful periods when confusion seemed believable. Even deleted conversations often targeted emotionally important exchanges likely to destabilize Eric psychologically later. Listening to the explanation felt surreal because for the first time, concrete evidence confirmed Eric had not imagined everything. Yet the relief lasted only seconds before something far worse replaced it. Caleb traced repeated device access directly to Vanessa Nolan's private accounts. Same IP ranges, same backup permissions, same hidden administrator profiles buried beneath shared household systems. Eric stared silently at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing because deep down, part of him still expected another explanation to appear at the last moment. But there wasn't one. The terrifying reality unfolded slowly over the following days as Caleb uncovered more information buried inside archived devices and corrupted backups Vanessa assumed nobody would ever inspect closely. Vanessa Nolan orchestrated everything, not out of rage, not because of an affair or dramatic revenge plot. Control. That was the center of the entire story. Complete emotional, financial, and psychological control over Eric's reality. Once Eric understood that, years of confusing memories suddenly rearranged themselves into something horrifyingly coherent. Vanessa did not manipulate him through dramatic abuse or obvious threats. She rewrote his confidence piece by piece until dependence replaced certainty. Every correction about his memory weakened trust in his own instincts. Every social interaction reframed through Vanessa's interpretation slowly isolated him emotionally from outside perspectives. Every deleted file, altered email, and missing conversation created confusion that made Eric rely more heavily on Vanessa to explain reality back to him afterward. The manipulation worked because Vanessa understood something most people never recognize until it happens to them. If someone controls the information surrounding you long enough, they eventually control how you understand yourself too. Eric spent hours replaying old memories through this new perspective while nausea and disbelief twisted together inside him. Vanessa monitoring household finances suddenly looked different now. The way she insisted handling passwords and digital accounts to reduce stress no longer sounded caring. It sounded strategic. Every friendship that faded over the years now carried traces of subtle interference he failed to recognize before. Vanessa quietly telling people Eric struggled emotionally, suggesting he forgot conversations, framing ordinary stress reactions as evidence of instability. Even Lauren's growing distance suddenly made painful sense because Vanessa carefully shaped how their daughter interpreted Eric's behavior long before he realized anything dangerous was happening. The psychological devastation came not only from betrayal itself, but from understanding how long it lasted unnoticed. Eric had not suddenly started losing his mind over recent months. His reality had been rewritten gradually for years while he interpreted manipulation as love, support, and concern. That realization destroyed him emotionally because it forced him to confront a terrifying truth about human vulnerability. Intelligence alone does not protect people from psychological control when trust becomes the weapon used against them. Then Caleb uncovered evidence even darker than the surveillance itself. Hidden among encrypted storage folders sat private recordings Vanessa created intentionally over several years. At first, the files resembled ordinary home videos or security clips. But once Eric watched carefully, disturbing patterns emerged immediately. Vanessa staged situations specifically designed to provoke emotional confusion before secretly recording his reactions afterward. In one video, she moved financial documents between folders repeatedly, while Eric searched the office in growing frustration until eventually snapping emotionally. Another recording showed Vanessa waking Eric after only 2 hours of sleep, insisting he forgot an important appointment that never actually existed. She filmed him panicking while trying desperately to organize missing paperwork around the house. In nearly every clip, Vanessa remained calm while Eric appeared unstable, paranoid, or emotionally irrational. Watching the recordings felt unbearable because Eric recognized genuine fear and confusion in his own face during moments he once believed were personal failures. Vanessa had not merely documented emotional breakdowns. She engineered them carefully. The medication tampering explained why certain memories felt fragmented for years. Caleb discovered Vanessa repeatedly accessed online medical portals connected to Eric's prescriptions while researching combinations of anti-anxiety medication and sleep aids capable of increasing confusion, memory disruption, and emotional dependency over long periods. Eric immediately remembered the prescription bottle rolling beneath the bathroom sink months earlier. The medication he never recalled agreeing to take. Vanessa framed it publicly as treatment for stress, while subtly increasing doses during emotionally vulnerable periods. Doctors trusted her descriptions because she presented herself as a concerned spouse caring for a mentally deteriorating husband. That detail shattered Eric more completely than the digital surveillance ever could because it revealed how thoroughly Vanessa weaponized public perception. She understood society instinctively trusts calm caretakers over emotionally distressed individuals defending themselves, especially when the distressed person already appears unstable publicly. Vanessa built an entire psychological prison around Eric while ensuring everyone outside viewed her as compassionate for staying beside him through it. But the most devastating discovery came near the end of Caleb's investigation. Hidden inside a corrupted audio archive was a conversation recorded accidentally through one of Vanessa's backup devices nearly 2 years earlier. The quality distorted parts of the dialogue, but Vanessa's voice remained unmistakably clear during the final portion. Calm, measured, almost clinical. "If people think he's confused," she said quietly, "they'll trust me instead." Eric stopped breathing for several seconds after hearing the sentence because suddenly every nightmare, every missing file, every humiliating moment of self-doubt became horrifyingly real all at once. Vanessa had never wanted Eric completely destroyed. That would attract suspicion. She wanted him dependent, uncertain, weak enough that everyone naturally turned toward her version of reality instead of his. Psychological abuse becomes especially terrifying when victims realize the manipulation succeeded precisely because it looked so ordinary from the outside. Concern, patience, emotional support. Vanessa Nolan hid complete control beneath the appearance of love so convincingly that even Eric spent years defending the person quietly dismantling his identity piece by piece. And perhaps the most disturbing part of all was this. Even after discovering the truth, Eric still found himself questioning certain memories automatically. That is what long-term manipulation does eventually. It teaches victims to distrust themselves so deeply that certainty never fully returns even after the evidence becomes undeniable. Eric Nolan spent 3 full days sitting alone inside hotel rooms after Caleb Mercer exposed the truth, because returning home suddenly felt psychologically impossible. Every memory connected to the house now carried a different meaning. The kitchen conversations, the late-night reassurances, the moments Vanessa held him while he questioned his own sanity. Even ordinary family photographs started feeling contaminated by uncertainty because Eric no longer knew how much of his emotional life had been shaped deliberately over time. Caleb urged him to contact law enforcement immediately, but Eric hesitated longer than anyone expected. Not because he doubted the evidence anymore, because accepting the truth emotionally felt harder than proving it technically. People imagine discovering manipulation creates clarity. In reality, it often creates something much worse. Once trust collapses completely, victims begin questioning the authenticity of entire portions of their lives. Eric found himself replaying vacations, birthdays, arguments, anniversaries, and intimate conversations, wondering which emotions were genuine and which were carefully engineered to maintain control. That uncertainty became more psychologically devastating than the surveillance itself, because suddenly even his happiest memories felt unstable. Eventually, Eric returned home late one evening knowing he could no longer avoid confronting Vanessa directly. The house looked exactly the same as always, perfectly organized, warm lights glowing softly through windows. Vanessa sat calmly inside the living room reading as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. For several seconds, Eric simply stood there watching her, because after everything Caleb uncovered, part of him still expected guilt or panic to appear the moment she saw his face. Instead, Vanessa looked almost relieved. She closed the book quietly and asked whether he wanted coffee in the same gentle tone she used for years whenever he returned home stressed from work. That normalcy disturbed Eric more than anger would have. He placed printed forensic reports, screenshots, remote access logs, and recordings across the coffee table while explaining everything Caleb discovered. Vanessa listened silently without interrupting once. No emotional breakdown. No desperate denial. No screaming accusations. Just calm stillness while Eric's voice shook harder with every sentence because speaking the truth aloud finally made the nightmare fully real. Then came the moment Eric would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. After nearly 20 minutes of silence, Vanessa finally looked directly at him and smiled faintly in a way he suddenly realized he had misunderstood for years. Not warmth. Control. The scary part is, she said softly, you still don't know when it started. Silence filled the room immediately afterward because Eric understood exactly what she meant the second the words left her mouth. The manipulation did not begin recently. Not with deleted emails or hidden recordings. It started much earlier. So much earlier that Eric no longer knew which version of himself existed before Vanessa slowly began shaping his reality around dependence and self-doubt. Suddenly, memories from the last decade became emotionally unstable all at once. Arguments he once believed were his fault. Career decisions Vanessa encouraged. Friendships that faded after conversations he barely remembered. Even therapy sessions where Vanessa framed his confusion as emotional instability. Eric realized with horrifying clarity that some of his memories might never be fully trustworthy again, because psychological control works most effectively when victims cannot identify where manipulation actually began. Vanessa never fully confessed in the dramatic way Eric expected. That almost made the confrontation worse emotionally. She described her actions calmly, rationally, even sympathetically at times. According to Vanessa, Eric's emotional reserve and obsession with control made him impossible to reach through ordinary communication years earlier. She claimed the manipulation started small initially, organizing finances without telling him, monitoring his accounts to prevent stress, correcting conversations he remembered differently because she believed his version created unnecessary conflict. Over time, though, the control itself became addictive. Vanessa admitted she liked how dependent Eric became once he stopped trusting himself completely. She liked being the stable person everyone believed automatically. "You needed me," she whispered quietly during the conversation. "Eventually, you stopped functioning without me." Eric stared at her, unable to comprehend how someone could describe psychological destruction with such emotional calmness. That was the moment he truly understood something terrifying about manipulation. The most dangerous people are often not visibly cruel. They are emotionally convincing enough to make abuse sound reasonable while it's happening. But the final emotional collapse came later that night after Lauren arrived unexpectedly at the house. Eric assumed his daughter would finally support him once confronted with evidence proving years of manipulation. Instead, Lauren broke down, crying almost immediately after entering the living room because she already knew pieces of the truth long before Eric discovered them himself. Not everything, but enough. Vanessa spent years quietly controlling how Lauren viewed her father emotionally by framing Eric as fragile, unstable, and increasingly confused. At first, Lauren believed it completely because Vanessa sounded concerned rather than malicious. But over time, Lauren started noticing strange inconsistencies. Files disappearing. Vanessa interrupting conversations constantly. Her father doubting himself after simple disagreements. Once Lauren even overheard Vanessa rehearsing explanations about Eric's memory problems before a family gathering where nothing unusual had happened yet. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eric asked through tears after learning this. Lauren looked devastated before answering the question honestly. "Because I was scared of her too." That sentence destroyed whatever emotional strength Eric still carried because suddenly the damage spread beyond his own suffering. Lauren admitted she spent years walking carefully around Vanessa emotionally because challenging her often led to subtle punishment afterward. Silent treatment, manipulation, emotional guilt powerful enough to make resistance feel exhausting. Lauren never recognized it clearly as abuse while growing up because nothing inside the house looked dramatic from the outside. No screaming, no violence, no obvious cruelty, just constant emotional control hidden beneath perfection. Hearing his daughter describe the same fear he lived with shattered Eric completely because it confirmed something even harder to accept than betrayal itself. Vanessa did not simply manipulate him privately. She shaped the emotional reality of the entire family for years while everyone inside the house slowly adapted around her control without fully realizing it. In the final days before Eric left the house permanently, he spent hours alone watching old family videos, trying desperately to identify which moments still felt genuine. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, vacations beside lakes and beaches where everyone smiled naturally into cameras. Some memories still looked real enough to hurt. Others suddenly felt staged in ways Eric never noticed before. Vanessa guiding conversations subtly, correcting small details, positioning herself emotionally at the center of every interaction while Eric faded quietly into the background. The most horrifying part was realizing many moments probably were genuine. Vanessa likely loved portions of their life together sincerely. That ambiguity made everything harder because abuse hidden beneath affection creates emotional confusion victims carry long after escape. Eric eventually understood there would never be a single clean answer separating truth from manipulation completely. Some memories belonged to him. Others belonged to the version of reality Vanessa carefully built around him over time. And maybe that is what makes stories like this so deeply unsettling. People imagine manipulation as something obvious, loud, immediate. But real psychological control often happens slowly enough that victims adapt to it before recognizing danger. One corrected memory at a time. One isolated friendship at a time. One moment of self-doubt repeated until certainty disappears completely, which leaves only one terrifying question behind. If someone controls your reality slowly enough, would you even notice? The story of Eric Nolan disturbed so many people because it forced audiences to confront a terrifying reality most never think about until it happens to someone close to them. Psychological abuse rarely looks dramatic from the outside. There are no obvious bruises, no shattered furniture, no scenes dramatic enough for neighbors to immediately recognize danger. Instead, it often hides inside ordinary routines, quiet corrections, emotional dependence, and gradual isolation repeated slowly over years. That is what made Eric's story feel so emotionally unsettling. Millions of people watching could recognize pieces of their own relationships, families, or friendships inside moments that once seemed harmless. A partner constantly correcting memories. Someone making you question your reactions repeatedly. Feeling emotionally exhausted after conversations you cannot fully explain afterward. Over time, those patterns can become powerful enough to reshape how people understand themselves completely. And perhaps the most frightening part of all is that intelligent, emotionally stable people are not immune to manipulation simply because they believe they would recognize it. Eric Nolan spent decades helping clients avoid financial fraud and emotional pressure professionally. Yet he still failed to recognize someone quietly rewriting his reality inside his own home. What makes the emotional weight even harder to escape is realizing Vanessa Nolan never relied on physical violence to gain control. She used trust, affection, social perception, patience. She understood that if someone slowly damages another person's confidence long enough, eventually they begin participating in their own confusion without realizing it. Eric documented evidence obsessively because deep down he sensed reality slipping away from him before he could explain why. But every attempt to defend himself only made him appear more unstable publicly because Vanessa controlled the emotional narrative surrounding him long before he uncovered proof. That is why so many experts describe psychological abuse as one of the most devastating forms of manipulation people can experience. Victims often lose trust not only in others, but in their own instincts, memories, and emotional judgment. Even after discovering the truth, Eric still questioned parts of his reality automatically because years of conditioning taught him self-doubt before certainty. Some damage survives long after evidence becomes undeniable. And maybe that is the question this story leaves behind more than any other. Do you think Eric Nolan should have noticed the warning signs earlier? Were the clues obvious enough that he ignored them willingly? Or did Vanessa manipulate him so gradually that almost anyone could have fallen into the same emotional trap without realizing it? Let us know what you think in the comments below because stories like this create difficult conversations people rarely have openly. Can psychological abuse actually become more damaging than physical abuse over time? And if someone slowly manipulated your reality piece by piece while everyone around you believed their version of events instead of yours, would you even recognize it happening before it was too late? Sometimes the most dangerous situations are not the loudest ones. Sometimes they happen quietly inside ordinary homes where nobody outside notices anything wrong until someone's sense of reality has already been taken away from them completely. And if you think this story was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened inside the next marriage.